Hey everybody, Cosmic's here. I'm here to just got done playing the Nirvana demo here at Pax West on day 2, and I'm let you introduce yourself here.
I'm Fernando Damas. I'm the writer and programmer of Valhalla and Nirvana.
So, how's PAX been so far for you?
Standing up a lot, basically. but it's been great. It's my first time here, so it's really interesting to see the differences because my only other trade show has been TGS, Tokyo Game Show. So being here, it's like seeing a completely different environment, a completely different way of setting things up, and even a different reaction of people of how they play games and such.
So, okay, so I'm a big fan of the first game.
Thank you.
Let's dive into this. How is Nirvana going to be different from Valhalla?
Well, for starters, the game takes place in a completely different setting. Where Valhalla was in the slums, in the lowest part of the city, Nirvana takes place in another city, but it's basically a man-made island made to be the perfect tourist attraction, the perfect tourist resort of sorts. So, as such, a lot of rich people are there, and by extension, this reflects into the gameplay because unlike Valhalla, where the ingredients were simulated, the drinks here are real alcohol, are real drinks because the context allows it to be real drinks. And that extends also to the kind of people you'll see because while Valhalla set up and explore mostly people making ends meet in one way or another, Nirvana is gonna focus more on people a bit higher on the echelons of society. For example, the demo we're showcasing right now is about an office worker, Olivia, is in a very competitive work environment where if you make it to the highest echelons, you're gonna make some really high paychecks. But at the same time, that makes it so that the competition is really cutthroat, and the demo explains just how cutthroat it can be.
So are we gonna see? Is there a big time gap between on top of the spatial difference between Valhalla and Nirvana?
It's about. It takes place right about the time that Valhalla ends. Nirvana starts up right around that point. So from the end of the game, it's about half a year or so.
Okay. Will we be able to see any returning faces like Jill?
It's too early to tell because I could tell you like, yes, they're gonna be or no, they're gonna be, but plans change, so I can't make any promises at this stage right now.
All right. So on the demo here, I was playing, I believe, Sam.
Yep.
Is that gonna be our main protagonist for this game?
Yeah, she's basically the Jill of this scenario. She's the main bartender and the one the player is gonna take control of, basically.
Okay. So, for the overall series of Valhalla and Nirvana, where did the inspiration to create a cyberpunk bartender action come from?
The inspiration because we originally made Valhalla for a game jam, the Cyberpunk Jam, and during that time we saw that a lot of the submissions were always based around, okay, here's a hero, here's the hacker, here's this and that, and us being contrarians by nature, we were like, okay, but they're always focusing on the hero. What if we focus on something else, someone on the background? And eventually the idea came for focusing on a bar, and then the idea started flowing from there. If we look for specific inspirations, one of them was the manga Bartender. In fact, the name of the bar, Valhalla, actually is partially inspired because the bar in that manga was called Eden Hall. So I just took it from there and started sorting things around, and that's where the name came from. But aside from that, core inspirations, it's just an amalgamation of everything we like, so it's really hard to pinpoint specific ones, especially if we start going like into specific characters or specific elements or specific moments. Those are gonna probably take from like 3 sources at least each one, so I could be here going through the game and listing every single one that came to that.
So, visual novels, as both Valhalla and Nirvana aren't really for. It's not the biggest, market like first-person shooters. So, being the devs of a fairly successful visual novel, how do you go about, trying to get people to try out this type of game?
I think part of the problem is that people don't really get that visual novels have a visual element. A lot of the time, visual novels feel like novels that were slapped into something that has a visual element to it. When we make games, we design them thinking about stuff that you can't get otherwise. That's, for example, why Valhalla doesn't have. If you pay attention, you notice that Valhalla doesn't have a narrator. Other visual novels use the narrator to fill in the gaps of stuff that you can't show. We try to show as much as possible, or at least to convey everything as much as we can with the characters themselves. And on top of that, there's also the element that people need breaks in the reading. So, because we've seen a lot of people that say that they don't like visual novels, but they like their game. I think part of it's that when I made the game, I was also in a state that where I loved them, but I was also kind of frustrated with the way they were going. So a lot of the direction of Valhalla was basically me trying to fix those flaws that I saw. The flaws specifically being that the first one that I mentioned, the fact that they tend to ignore the visual element of visual novel and rely too much on narrators to convey the actions. For example, a visual novel might go, a phone rings, and then the narrator says, the phone in my pocket rang, so I picked it up. Whereas whereas you could just as easily put a phone ring, and then just have and then just put another sound effect of picking it up, and the character saying hello. It's conveying exactly the same in a less verbose way and in a more organic way, because people aren't stupid. They can put two and two together. So we try to give it that element, and also to make it so that the chunks of reading are spaced out. In Valhalla, a lot of the reading was made lighter by spacing it up with the mixing. Lots of times the mixing was there at points where we were like, people are reading too much at this point, so let's put a break here so that they can basically digest everything that came out, and they can mix things to take things a different direction and then keep reading. And here in Nirvana, we actually go further with that, because you play the demo, you saw that there's like some windows that tells them, okay, what mood do I take this conversation into? That's an extra element, because we didn't want to add dialogue choices in the same form as everyone else, because we don't want the player to think that they have control over the character. They only have control over the direction that the character will go, but they can, for example, tell Sam to say this thing, because that can bring moments where it can end up out of character, for example. So, for example, Sam doesn't say, okay, now I'm going to say this. Rather, you just tell her, okay, the situation is a bit moody, try to lighten it up with a joke, for example. And those add an extra break on top of the mixing, in this case.
All right, so we've talked about the mixing here. Why did you decide on a bartender game? Like, why did you decide on, how did you get to the alcohol premise?
That's the tricky one. So the original idea was just that, you're in a bar, and then we took it from the logical direction. Like, we're in a bar, you can serve drinks, but what if you serve the wrong drink? That's when we thought, okay, maybe the characters will react differently if you give them wrong drinks. But that brought up an interesting clash, in the sense that when we wanted to make the full game, you know how, for example, if you want to make a platformer, you have a lot of reference of what a platformer is like. If you want to make a shooter, you have a lot of reference of what a shooter is like. we went for bartending games, but those games always go for the try to make this as close as possible to the recipe approach. Well, where we wanted more of a freeform approach. We want, in practice, the mixing is basically a glorified abstract dialogue menu. That's where you make your choices, but you don't make them obviously. It's not like, okay, I have these three choices. You are mixing drinks, and those drinks are gonna take things a different way. We didn't find a reference for that, and that was cumbersome because a lot of the development was just basically trying to figure out if we were doing things right or if we could do things better. But to go back to the question, that's basically how we ended up with the mixing. We started with, we're gonna do this, then we were like, okay, but what if the player does something different? And then we started taking it to the logical conclusion. What if the dialogue depends on what drinks you serve across the whole client? And in Urbana, we're expanding further into that by adding more parameters to what the drinks end up as. Because in Valhalla, the only parameters that ended up in practice were what drink you serve and what amount of alcohol the character has accumulated. In Urbana, we're adding more stuff. Like, for example, you can the clients can pick, okay, you serve this property, or you serve this ingredient, or it has this flavor, or it has this amount of this ingredient, or like another example in the Olivia's case, this flavor is above every other flavor. We basically expanded on the idea from Valhalla by adding more stuff that the characters can use to read, okay, I'm going to take the dialogue this way.
So, with Nirvana, obviously, the big part of all these games is the colorful cast that comes in, and you get to know these characters on top of their taste preferences. Is there any characters you're excited for people to see, like coming up in Nirvana?
If there are, I want to keep the surprise. but in general, I just want them to get to know Sam, because people really like Jill, and I want them to meet another character that's gonna have the same focus as Jill, but it's completely different. Sam is the complete opposite of Jill, but I want them to meet them just as much as everyone else. There's other characters that I have in mind, but I want to keep those a surprise for now.
Yeah, I respect that. So I guess we'll just wrap it up here. Could we expect to see this possibly next year at any point?
That's the plan, at least for now.
Yeah. All right. Well, thank you, man.